You're watching the African Nutrition Society podcast. Throughout the weekend, we've been discussing school health and nutrition. We're looking at practical approaches to improving school health. And I have with me here Professor Donald A.P. Bundy at the Research Consortium. Professor Donald Bundy is a professor of epidemiology and development at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. He's director of the Research Consortium for School Health and Nutrition and advisor to the UN World Food Programme, leading a global research effort to provide evidence-based guidance to the 95-plus member states of the School Meals Coalition on strengthening national school meals programs. Previously, Professor Bundy served as senior advisor to the global health team of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, lead education and health specialist to the World Bank's Africa Region and Human Development Policy Unit, and deputy director of the Epidemiology Center at University of Oxford. You're very welcome, Professor Bundy. It's so humbling to have you here. So throughout the weekend, we've been having sessions for school health and nutrition. What has been your impression of the event preceding the African Nutrition Conference?
So it's wonderful to have a chance to talk about these things with you.
Great.
It's been a great weekend, I think. We've really heard from across Africa about the experiences in school health and school meals. So it's, I think, been the right beginning for the big meeting itself.
Right. And I'm curious about your motivation to focus your research on school health and nutrition, particularly in the context of global development.
Right. Well, those of us who are in the health and nutrition area, as we both are, we've had this sort of historical focus, quite rightly, on the survival of children. That was whenever we talked about health and nutrition for children, it was life or death that we were often talking about, and that was the focus. And what's happened, I think, though, is clear that there's been really major progress in that area.
Right.
And then the question becomes, if you survive for what? And people talk about surviving and then thriving. And my interest has been always in the thriving part of that equation. And let me expand just a little bit on that to say the issue of thriving. Many people, when we use that term, they're thinking about little children, infants in particular, neonates, surviving and then doing well, being set on a good trajectory for the rest of their lives. That's the concept. And that's become enshrined in the idea of the first 1,000 days of life. Surely the most important days of our lives. First in utero, then as neonates, then as infants. Those are the important times. That is the important phase. But what we're increasingly thinking about is what then? What after those first 1,000 days? And so in terms of development, it's after those first 1,000 days that we educate our children. So education happens at school age, what some people call middle childhood, followed then by adolescence. So those are also vitally important parts of what needs to happen to us before we become adults. And so we increasingly use language to say, yes, the first 1,000 days are the most important, and we need to do all the things that we already know about doing in that area. But then there's, if you like, another 7,000 days before we reach our 20s, before we become adults, which are also very important times. For example, that's when puberty happens, or one of the biggest changes in our lives.
Right.
It's also the time when our brains get rewired. During late adolescence, this is a whole developmental period. It's when we choose to educate ourselves, when we need to think about the well-being of the children as well. And so that's the important message for me. So that's my motivation, is, yep, we must survive. At all costs, we must keep people alive, of course. But we also need to reflect on what we need to do to support our young people as they grow into adulthood.
Because they are still, we operate by our brain, and so during that period, we're still experiencing brain development, and so it's important to focus on that. That said, as the director of the Research Consortium for School Health and Nutrition, what are the primary goals of the School Meals Coalition that your office or your outfit supports?
Right. So the School Meals Coalition was created by countries. Let's be very clear on that. This was countries coming together in 2021, October 2021, after the beginning of the COVID pandemic. And the motivation for them was the closure of schools during that pandemic, right? So the schools closed worldwide, some for a very long time. The schools closed, and of course that put a stop to education for young people. But what countries discovered was that it also put a stop to so many other ways that children were being reached with health and with nutrition interventions. Those things just stopped. And the children found themselves, as it were, out of reach of the institutions that had historically been their main support. That caused problems. It caused problems in high-income countries, low-income countries, middle-income countries across the world. It caused sufficient problems for parents to be saying, wait a minute, what are you governments doing? We need to look after our children.
Right.
And so that was the motivation for the coalition. And it was a motivation to say, what is it we need to do to repair that damage? And the coalition decided they had 3 goals. Okay. The first was, let's get back to where we were before COVID as soon as possible. So if we had a school meals program, let's roll it out again. If we had a school health program, let's roll it out again. Let's make that happen. I'm happy to say that's happened. That goal has already largely been achieved. The second goal was, what about all those kids we didn't reach before COVID? And we reckoned that was something like 73 million children, 73 million of the most vulnerable children.
That's a lot.
It's a lot. Were not reached. We now estimate, I know it was a lot, that estimate was done for that 2021 meeting. We now think that the number's somewhere between 100 and 150 million children. So reaching them also has to be a priority, and it is the second big goal of the coalition. And the third goal of the coalition is not to say, well, now we've done enough, but to say, okay, we now need to increase the overall coverage, and we also need to increase the quality, improve the quality of what we're doing in schools. So those are the goals of the coalition. Those are the goals of the politicians and the governments. And they've asked that we create a research consortium to provide independent guidance on what's the evidence, what are the policy decisions that would help achieve those goals.
Right, interesting. And so, looking at these plans that we had in place, how can schools balance the need for nutritious meals with logistical and budget constraints? We know that we're working all these, it's money. So how can we have a balance as we demand for school meals, ensuring the quality of the meals? I've always said this, even in all my interviews, that we have meetings, we have conferences, we disperse funds, but I feel that what is happening on the ground seems insufficient for what is planned in our meeting rooms. And so how do we have that balance so that we have that monitoring and evaluation system to ensure that what we discuss is what is there, and we have a budget, we don't have any constraints as far as logistics are concerned?
So the issue here is the usual issue that governments face. If the role of governments is to provide services and support its population, the issue that they face is that they have to prioritize those supports. Given that the budget, however large it is still finite,
right.
There needs to be a prioritization in here. So the question is, why should governments spend on this particular area of intervention versus doing something else? Why should this be a priority? And I think the best way to think about this is in terms of value for money, or maybe not the best way, but certainly one of the useful ways of trying to quantify this story. Because for a government, that in the end, I think, is probably the most pressing question. And so you, as a nutritionist, asked me the question as though the question was about the nutrition of children. But for a government looking at this, they need to look at it not simply as that, or not only as that. It is that, but it's not the whole answer. And that's where this concept of value for money comes in. So we've been looking very closely with several governments now. You have, for example, you have a school meals program, or you have a school health program. That's a cost. That's the cost you have to find. The question is, what are the benefits you get from investing that amount of money? And if you say, well, what are the returns to nutrition, which was kind of the question that you asked me, then you can see there are valuable returns to nutrition. What would those be? Well, there's immediate benefits that the children feel, better health, all the concepts of better health, longer lives, and so forth, and of course, good nutrition at the right age also reduces your risk of non-communicable diseases in middle age and so forth. So there's a whole health benefit, a health stream that you can see. But then when you look more closely, there are these other benefits. If you were an education person asking me this question, you say, why should we improve the well-being of our school children? And the answer, I would say, so the world spends $2.8 trillion on education between the ages of 5 and 19. That's a UNESCO number for primary and secondary education worldwide. $2.8 trillion. It's an enormous amount of money. The health community spends about 2% of that on those children, on that age group, right? So actually the well-being of young people has not been historically really prioritized.
Exactly.
Right? And yet we now have very compelling evidence that their well-being determines their ability to benefit from the education.
That we are spending so much money on.
Right. So we're spending a lot of money on excellent quality education, better teachers, better textbooks, and all of those things. But if the child isn't able to learn, hasn't had the well-being that allows her to concentrate when she's in class and attend class and be regular in class, and so if you don't have that well-being, then that money is not being leveraged properly, not being leveraged properly. So there we can see there's two benefits. And of course, and what's the benefit of an educated population? Well, the World Bank talks about human capital. The countries which are classified in the high income range, they reckon that about 70% of the wealth of those countries comes from the people, whereas those countries in the low income range, it's about 30 to 40% comes from the people. So not only are people not achieving their own personal potential, but they're also not giving back to the community in the same way they could. So they're undervalued by that.
Right.
And so we've said now, so health, education, but there's also the issue, and this is a huge issue in many countries, of social protection, meaning a safety net for young people as they grow up. And for many countries, one of the priority benefits of supporting them in school, of providing them with food in school, is that's their safety net. That's what keeps them away from the poverty line. That's what keeps them from dropping out and so forth. So that's a big benefit. And then I'm going to add a fourth one. I will stop, but I just think these are important.
Keep going.
They're important. What's the other benefit? Well, where does the food come from? If the food is purchased from your local farmers, and in some countries, they make it very local farmers, so purchasing food from the farmers around the school. For example, in Brazil, 30% of the food comes from so-called family farms around the school. In Africa, this is the idea of homegrown school feeding. If those are the people that are supplying the food, then actually you're investing right into the community, actually into a group within the community that's often the least invested in and the least supported.
I'm actually not an economist, but I see that this also helps with the economy, right? Because you having your own people, country invest in themselves.
Yes. So that's four things I've talked about. I'm just going to say, just to give a mention of one which people often miss out on, which is gender. Okay. So school meals, one of the things school meals is very strong on, is getting girls into school and staying in school. In fact, it disproportionately benefits girls. But that's also true for some school health interventions. So school health interventions around menstrual hygiene, for example, ensure girls are able to stay in school. What is the value of making sure you have an educated population of women in your country? That's a huge return, actually, it's a huge benefit that we often don't think of as a benefit. But those young women are going to become mothers. They are going to be responsible for the next generation. Investing in that group is a hugely high return. Definitely. So I hope I'm particularizing it because I think it's important for technical people to get this, that the question is not should countries be investing in school meals, for example, to improve nutrition. Mm-hmm. It is, should countries be investing in their next generation of young people? And the answer is, of course they should.
That's deep.
It's deep. And it means that prioritizing your school children and your adolescents to be your future national population, to be healthy and long-lived and well-trained, that's the investment we're talking about.
Making the right decisions for their community and country. That being said, Prof. Bundy, what advice would you give to policymakers looking to advocate for stronger school health and nutrition initiatives?
So I think, I've touched upon those in what I've just said.
Yes, and then you wrap it up with your final words.
Sure. So I'm going to say, so one of the things is, this is the right age group to try and change behavior lifelong. We all our behaviors, even our mental health situation, really starts in school age and adolescence. So you can set lifelong behaviors to eat, to want to eat, to have dietary preferences for foods which are sustainable and local foods. It's one of the few ways, actually, we can change people's menu preferences. We hear a lot about being vegetarian and vegan and things. Getting adults to change to those things really doesn't work. But if you set your trajectory early, so that's one reason that it's very important to start with that age group. The other piece that I think is very important is to realize that this is about the welfare of the nation. These are the future of the nation. They very rapidly become the future of the nation. We need to invest. We know, all countries know they need to invest in educating them. They need to recognize we also need to invest in their well-being if they're going to become good and productive citizens. And then the third one would be the point that I also made, but I just think is worth really emphasizing, is that adolescent girls will become mothers, though they will become the mothers of the next generation. So an investment now in them is also a long-term investment. And I think those are three things that make a very strong case for investing in the health and nutrition of school-age children and adolescents.
Definitely. Thank you so much for the great insights, very deep conversation. And I think these are things that policymakers need to hear and understand. Our community, stakeholders, multi-sectoral leaders, come together and deliberate on the benefits that I feel like many times we don't see the benefits, the direct benefits come in cash. And so it's difficult, particularly for policymakers, for governments to make those decisions because we think that it's just education. But what goes into the education? How healthy is that child who is receiving education, who is receiving the funds that we are providing to improve their education? And I'm so glad that you shared great insights on that for our policymakers, our governments who understand that, yes, you are invested in education, but there should be a balance in that investment versus investments in the health of the school-age child as well. So Viewers, this has been the African Nutrition Society podcast, and you've heard all for yourself. There is hope. We can do this as a people, as a country. Let's invest in the health of our school-age children, and it will come back to us long-term benefits. And my name is Helena. If you have any questions, you can put them in our chat, and we'll get back to you on that. Many thanks to our sponsors, especially the Catholic Relief Services. Thank you for watching. See you another time.